I don't think I did anything wrong. I just wanted people to laugh. It happened at our friend's party when I made a joke about my husband's size. Again, I thought it was harmless. He thought it was the last straw. What followed wasn't shouting or revenge, but paperwork and a silence that broke me more than any fight could. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. I'm Mara Vale, and I don't think I did anything wrong. It was just a joke. One I'd made before, one everyone laughed at. The party was loud, the drinks were flowing, and I wanted to make people smile. I didn't plan to humiliate my husband, Evan. I just wanted the room to love me the way they used to. When I teased him about his size again, it wasn't meant to sting. The laughter felt good, light, freeing. But the way he looked at me across the table, quiet, steady, unreadable, made something twist in my stomach. He didn't yell, didn't argue. He just stood up, thanked our host, and left. People said I went too far, but come on, it was humor, not cruelty. He'd made it worse by walking out like that. The next morning, the house was spotless, silent, his side of the bed smooth, his mug washed and turned upside down like a little goodbye. I told myself he'd cool off, that men always come back after they calm down. But then I noticed his phone alerts, meetings, folders, calendar notes, and the way he spoke softly, too softly, like someone who'd already decided on something. The party wasn't even supposed to be fancy. Just a casual birthday for Jenna's fiancé at this downtown lounge with too many mirrors and dim gold lighting that made everyone look better than they were. I remember fixing my lipstick in one of those mirrors, watching Evan in the background as he talked to a coworker of his. He looked serious, too serious for a Saturday night. I told myself he needed to loosen up. That was always his problem. Everything had to mean something. Every word, every gesture, every moment analyzed. I used to find that kind of thoughtfulness endearing. Now it just made him feel old. Jenna and I were by the bar, laughing about something stupid when she brought it up. She asked if Evan still blushed when people teased him. I rolled my eyes and said, only when someone mentions his size. She snorted into her drink, and that was all the encouragement I needed. I said it louder than I meant to, telling her it was cute how shy he got about it, that I used to think it was adorable. People nearby laughed, and that little ripple of attention felt like warmth spreading through me. Maybe it was the wine, maybe it was the thrill of being noticed again. I hadn't felt that in a while. Evan looked up from across the room, just for a second, his expression calm, unreadable. I lifted my glass and smiled at him, pretending I didn't care if he'd heard. Maybe I wanted him to. I always told myself he needed humbling sometimes. He was too composed, too sure of his moral high ground. He made me feel like the messy one, the dramatic one. Maybe that's why I doubled down when people asked what we were laughing about. I said, loud enough for him to hear, that he was a modest man, and that some men just didn't have much to show off. It got another round of laughter. Someone clinked their glass against mine. It felt like victory. He didn't storm over. He didn't say a word. He just finished his drink and spoke quietly to the person next to him. Then he put on his coat and left. No scene, no outburst, just the sound of the door closing behind him. The laughter around me felt strange after that, thin and brittle. I told everyone he was being dramatic, that he always got like this when attention wasn't on him. Jenna said he probably just needed air. I nodded, pretending to agree, but something cold had settled in my chest. The music felt louder, heavier. I ordered another drink. When I finally went home, the house was dark except for the faint glow from the kitchen. His mug was on the counter, clean next to mine, still half full of tea. It was like two people had been there, but only one had left properly. I went upstairs and found him already in bed, eyes closed, body turned away. I asked if he was awake. He said he was tired. I told him he'd embarrassed me by walking out. He said quietly that I'd embarrassed both of us long before that. His tone was too even, too calm. I hated it. I said it was just a joke, everyone laughed, that he was being ridiculous. He didn't reply. I lay there in the dark, angry at him for not fighting. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of a printer humming somewhere in the house. He was already dressed, sitting at the dining table with his laptop open, coffee steaming beside him. I asked if he was going to work on a Sunday. He said he had things to organize. His voice was flat, polite, the kind of tone he used with strangers. I told him he was overreacting. He said I always called things overreactions when I didn't want to look at them closely. Then he stood up and went to the guest room, closing the door behind him. I stared at the closed door for a long time, waiting for him to come out, to shout, to do something that made sense. Instead, I heard the faint sound of typing, and then the soft whir of the printer again. When I finally knocked, he said he was busy. I said busy with what? He said personal work. I laughed, said what personal work could you possibly have that needs printing on a Sunday? He didn't answer. I went back to the kitchen, poured myself coffee, and tried to shrug it off. Around noon, my mother called. She'd seen the photos from the party already because Jenna had posted them. She said I looked radiant, confident, that men often can't handle strong women who take the spotlight. She told me not to apologize, that women are expected to shrink themselves so their husbands feel tall. I told her she was right. I felt vindicated for a while after that call. I convinced myself I hadn't done anything wrong, that Evan was the one making it a big deal. Still, when I passed the guest room again, I noticed the smell of paper and toner coming through the door. I knocked once more, just lightly. He said he was on a call. I decided to go out. I texted Jenna, told her Evan was sulking. She said I should come over, that we'd open wine and laugh it off. At her apartment, I told the story again, performing it like a monologue. My husband, the stoic, the overreactor. She said he was probably embarrassed that everyone found the joke funny. She said men like that only pretend to be secure until someone challenges their pride. I laughed, and for a while it felt true. But when I got home, the air felt too clean, like the house had been aired out in my absence. His shoes were gone from the entryway, replaced neatly by my own. A stack of envelopes sat on the kitchen counter, sealed but blank. No writing, no labels, just a pen lying beside them. I called his name. No answer. The guest room door was open now, the bed made perfectly, not a wrinkle in sight. His laptop was gone. The desk was spotless except for one sticky note on the monitor stand. It said, "Bring forms." I didn't know what that meant. I tried to tell myself it was something work-related, but the words bothered me. Bring forms. Forms for what? He wasn't in the kind of job that dealt with paperwork like that. When I checked his closet, his clothes were still there, just rearranged. His side of the dresser looked too organized, like someone had tidied up before leaving for a trip they didn't plan to mention. That night, I texted him. I said I was sorry if I hurt his feelings, but that it really wasn't a big deal. I added a heart emoji, then deleted it, then added it again. He read it but didn't reply. I called twice. Straight to voicemail. I left a message saying we needed to talk, that he was being childish. The next morning, he was sitting in the kitchen again, reading something on his phone. I said we should just move past it. He said we would. His tone was so gentle it unnerved me. I asked if we were okay. He said we'd be fine. Then he took his mug, rinsed it, and left. Later that day, I opened my social media and saw someone had uploaded a short clip from the party. My own voice came through loud and clear. Me joking, laughing, my friends doubled over, while Evan stood in the background, expressionless. The comments weren't what I expected. Some people laughed, but others said things like, "That poor man," or, "Imagine your wife saying that in public." I deleted it, but it was too late. It had already been reshared. I spent the afternoon replying to messages, insisting it was just humor. Jenna said not to worry, that people love drama online. Still, when I checked again, Evan had deactivated his account. That evening, he came home late. He looked composed, maybe even liked her. I asked if we could talk. He said, "We are talking." I said I meant really talk. He said he'd said all he needed to. I asked what that meant. He said, "You'll see." It wasn't a threat, exactly. It was too calm for that, but something about his eyes made me feel small. I tried to joke again, said maybe I should hire a PR team since apparently my jokes are national news now. He smiled faintly and said, "You might want one." I didn't sleep that night. The silence felt different now, not tense but deliberate, like something had already been decided. Around midnight, I heard a drawer open somewhere down the hall, then the soft click of a lock. A door closed. I thought about knocking again, but didn't. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, telling myself he'd come around. He always did, but in the back of my mind, I could see that sticky note again. Bring forms. And for the first time, I wondered if maybe he wasn't planning to come back at all. Monday morning came too fast. I woke up to the sound of the shower running, but when I walked into the bathroom, Evan was already dressed, towel folded neatly over the rack. He didn't look at me when he grabbed his jacket. I asked if he wanted breakfast. He said he'd grab something on the way. I tried to sound light, asked if he was still mad. He said he wasn't mad. The way he said it, soft, calm, detached, made me wish he'd shouted instead. I told him he was acting like a stranger in his own house. He said quietly, "Strangers are polite." Then he left. I sat there with my coffee cooling in front of me, scrolling through my phone just to fill the silence. My reflection on the black screen looked tired, older somehow. The clip from the party was still circulating. Someone had tagged me in a comment thread calling the joke "spite dressed as humor." I replied under a fake name, defending myself. Then I deleted it. Jenna texted around 9, asking how Evan was handling things. I said he was sulking, but that it would blow over. She sent a laughing emoji and said, "He'll either get over it or file a complaint." I laughed at that, but the word "file" made my chest feel tight. At work, I tried to focus. The office buzzed as usual, phones ringing, keyboards clacking, but I kept catching glimpses of the clip on people's screens. I worked in marketing. Gossip spreads fast in offices like mine. Theo stopped by my desk, leaning against the divider. He had that grin he always wore when he knew something he shouldn't. He said he'd seen the video, that I had great comedic timing. I told him to drop it, that people were taking it too seriously. He said, "That's the price of being bold." I smirked, but inside I felt off balance. During lunch, Jenna joined me and 2 co-workers at the cafe downstairs. She loved holding court, telling stories, stirring small drama into entertainment. When she mentioned the party, I tried to laugh along, saying I'd learned my lesson. No more jokes about my husband in public. The table laughed, but one of the girls said quietly, "He looked hurt, though." It was a simple comment, not even malicious, but it stung. I said he was always too sensitive, that marriage shouldn't mean tiptoeing around feelings. Jenna backed me up, saying men needed thicker skin. I nodded like she was right, but when I glanced at my phone, there was a notification from Evan. Just a calendar alert, downtown 11:40 a.m. No context. The timing confused me. It wasn't his usual schedule. I told myself it was a client meeting. Still, the specificity of it, 11:40 exactly, stuck in my mind. That evening, I got home before him. The house felt tidy in a way that made me uneasy. His shoes were aligned perfectly, his keys set in the small tray on the console table. He'd started folding the towels differently too, rolling them instead of stacking. It was like he was claiming order in every corner I left chaotic. When he came in, I tried to start light conversation. I asked if his meeting went well. He nodded but didn't elaborate. I said I was thinking of ordering Thai food. He said he'd already eaten. I told him he could have told me. He said he didn't want to interrupt anything I had going on. I asked what that meant. He looked up for the first time in hours and said, "You always need an audience, Mara. I'm just trying not to block the view." I wanted to snap back, to accuse him of passive aggression, but his calmness disarmed me. I said he was making a big deal out of nothing. He said nothing was small anymore. That line lingered in my head long after he went back to his laptop. I heard the faint sound of typing again. A printer whirred once, then stopped. Later that night, I found myself pacing the hallway outside the guest room. The door was slightly open, and I saw the blue glow of his screen. His expression didn't change when he noticed me watching. He said he was finishing work. I asked what kind of work required printing blank pages. He didn't answer. I said it was creepy, the way he'd started locking things. He said quietly, "Privacy isn't creepy, it's overdue." Then he turned back to his screen. I shut the door harder than I meant to. The click echoed down the hall. Tuesday was worse. I tried pretending things were normal. I packed his lunch like I used to, even wrote a note on the napkin that said, "Don't be grumpy." I set it by his keys. When I came home that evening, the lunchbox was back on the counter, untouched, the napkin still folded neatly inside. I threw it in the trash. At dinner, I brought up the subject of counseling. He said calmly, "You can't mediate respect." I told him respect goes both ways. He said, "So does ridicule." He wasn't even angry when he said it. That made it worse. I told him he was punishing me with silence. He said, "No, I'm teaching you what silence feels like." I said, "You think this makes you strong?" He said, "It makes me accurate." He stood, rinsed his plate, and left the kitchen. I stared at the half-eaten food and hated that he could make me feel like the child in the room. Around 9, Jenna called. I told her he was being distant, that he was taking everything too literally. She said maybe I should post something light-hearted online to remind people I wasn't ashamed. I knew she meant well, her kind of well, but I took the advice anyway. I posted a selfie with the caption, "If you can't take a joke, don't marry funny." Within an hour, it had likes from half our friend circle. The dopamine rush was immediate, addictive. I told myself Evan would see it and realize how silly all this was. Instead, when he came home later, he didn't look at me at all. He went straight upstairs, his phone still in his hand. I saw the notification reflection flash across his glasses, probably my post. He closed the door. That night, I dreamed about laughter. Not real laughter, but the kind that sounds rehearsed. In the dream, I kept telling jokes no one found funny, and Evan stood in the corner, writing something on a clipboard. When I woke, I could hear the faint buzz of his phone in the guest room again. Another calendar ping. The glow under the door blinked once, then faded. By midweek, I started to notice how quiet the house had become. The TV stayed off. Music, once a background comfort, had disappeared. Even the fridge hum felt louder. I tried to fill the space with phone calls, Jenna, my mother, anyone who'd listen. I told the story so many times it started to sound rehearsed, like a script. The more I repeated it, the more convinced I became that I was right. That's how I survived guilt. Repetition until belief. Thursday morning, I found a small USB drive taped under the taxes folder in our filing drawer. I wasn't snooping exactly. I was looking for our insurance papers. The USB had a label with just a date. Last Saturday, the night of the party. My stomach twisted. I didn't plug it in. I just stared at it, then shoved the drawer shut. When Evan came home, I asked casually if he'd been sorting our finances. He said, "Just keeping records." I asked why he needed a drive for that. He said, "Some records aren't for sharing." That evening, I tried to test him. I brought up Theo, mentioned how he'd called me brilliant after my last campaign presentation. I wanted to see a flicker of jealousy, any sign of emotion. Evan only said, "I'm glad someone appreciates you." The indifference felt like a slap. I said he didn't have to be sarcastic. He said, "I'm not. I'm relieved you have fans." His tone was sincere, but his eyes weren't. I told him he was making me feel unwanted. He said, "You've made that clear already." I didn't understand what he meant until later, when I checked my phone. Theo had commented publicly on my post. "Someone tell her husband he's punching above his weight." The next day, Evan didn't come home after work until nearly midnight. I was waiting in the kitchen, pretending to read. When he walked in, I said, "You could have at least texted." He said, "You were busy online." I snapped, "So now you're tracking me?" He said, "No, you're public. It's easy." I wanted to yell, but something about his calmness unnerved me. I asked if he was planning to leave. He said, "I'm planning to finish." I asked, "Finish what?" He said, "Everything that's left." He went upstairs, leaving me standing there, clutching the edge of the table like it was the only solid thing in the room. Later that night, I crept into the guest room after he fell asleep. On his desk sat a stack of neatly arranged folders labeled Household, Utilities, Bank. A pen rested on top of a notebook, the first line written in his small, even handwriting, "When words fail, structure remains." I didn't know what that meant, but it made my hand shake. I left the room quietly, feeling like I'd walked into a crime scene that hadn't happened yet. By Friday morning, the silence between us had hardened into something unbreakable. We still spoke, but only about surface things: bills, groceries, the weather. He didn't raise his voice once. He didn't have to. His composure was louder than shouting. When I left for work, he said, "Drive safe." It was such a normal thing to say that it almost broke me. For a moment, I wanted to apologize, really apologize, but pride stopped me. Pride always does. I just smiled and said, "You too," pretending nothing in our world had shifted, even as every quiet sound in the house told me it already had. Saturday morning felt like an empty stage after a show. The laughter, the noise, even the small tension that used to fill the air, gone. Evan moved around the kitchen like a guest, silent, precise. He made coffee, measured the water, folded the paper towel into a perfect square before placing his mug on it. I watched from the doorway, waiting for him to say something first. He didn't. I finally asked if we were still pretending to be strangers. He said we weren't pretending. I told him his quiet was suffocating. He said, without looking at me, that I'd always loved an audience, and silence just didn't clap loud enough for me. I wanted to scream, but I didn't want to give him that satisfaction. I decided to get out of the house. Ruth, his mother, had invited us to her backyard barbecue for weeks. I thought showing up would make things look normal, or at least make him too polite to ignore me. He didn't argue when I told him we were going. He just nodded and said, "Fine, let's not make a scene." That annoyed me. The idea that he thought I'd cause a scene when he was the one turning our marriage into a silent protest was insulting. When we got there, everything looked irritatingly peaceful. Ruth's garden was perfectly trimmed, kids were running around, and the grill smoked in the corner. She hugged Evan first, like always, then gave me a polite, restrained smile. It wasn't hostile, just careful. I could tell she knew something. She always knew things before I wanted her to. I complimented the food. She thanked me but didn't look at me directly. During lunch, conversation flowed easily around me but never toward me. His cousins asked Evan about work, his brother joked about some football game, and I sat there smiling, nodding, pretending it didn't bother me. When Ruth asked how the two of you were doing, I laughed and said, "Oh, we're fine. Just a little marital miscommunication. Nothing a sense of humor can't fix." Evan's fork paused midair. He didn't look at me, but I saw his jaw tighten. Ruth gave me a long look, the kind of maternal disappointment that doesn't need words. Afterward, when people were moving around the yard, I tried to lighten the mood. I made a joke about how Evan had turned into the strong, silent type. emphasis on silent. A few people chuckled politely. I caught his mother's expression. She didn't laugh. She said quietly, "Respect doesn't survive ridicule, dear." It was like being slapped with a sentence. I muttered something about people being too sensitive these days, but my voice didn't sound convincing. Evan left the group after that, helping his brother fix the patio lights. I tried to ignore how easily he slipped back into calmness with everyone else. He laughed with them, small, polite laughs, but genuine enough to sting. I joined Ruth at the drink table, hoping to smooth things over. She asked softly if everything was all right at home. I said yes, that things were just tense because of work. She nodded slowly, then said, "He's always been patient. Don't mistake that for weakness." I said she was overreacting. She didn't argue. She just turned back to the grill. When it was time to leave, Evan thanked everyone, helped clean up, and drove home in silence. Halfway there, I said, "You could at least tell me what you're thinking." He said, "I'm thinking about what to keep." I asked, "Keep from what?" He said, "From before." His tone made it sound like there was a line between before and after, and I didn't know when we'd crossed it. At home, he went straight to the study. I followed him, angry now. I told him his mother had no right to make comments about our marriage. He said she didn't have to. My behavior said enough. I told him he was turning everyone against me. He said I didn't need help doing that. I wanted to throw something at him, but instead, I sat down on the couch, scrolling through my phone to prove to myself I was still in control of something. Theo had messaged me earlier that afternoon. "You made them squirm. Priceless." I smiled at the text, partly out of spite. I sent back, "You know me. Always the entertainment." He replied with a winking emoji. It made me feel good, in the same hollow way sugar calms a craving. That evening, I went into the kitchen and saw Evan's phone on the counter. I wasn't proud of what I did next. I picked it up, half expecting to see messages with someone else, maybe a lawyer or friend, but his texts were clean. No recent conversations except one labeled with a gear emoji. Oh. The thread was short. Times, dates, small confirmations like received and noted. I didn't understand them, but they scared me. I set the phone down before he came back. Later, while I was putting dishes away, he said without looking up, "You're not subtle." I froze. He continued, "Next time you touch my phone, just ask." I started to deny it, but my voice failed. I said, "Why are you hiding things?" He said, "Because I'm learning to protect myself." The word protect made me laugh. I said, "Protect yourself from what? Me?" He said quietly, "Exactly." We slept in separate rooms again. Around midnight, I heard faint noises. A drawer opening, a zipper, the low hum of the printer again. I lay still, staring at the ceiling. It wasn't the sound that kept me awake. It was the calmness behind it. Evan had always been predictable, steady. But now, every small action felt deliberate, rehearsed. Sunday morning, I tried pretending things were normal again. I made pancakes, something we hadn't done together in months. When he came downstairs, he looked surprised but didn't comment. I poured him coffee, asked if he wanted syrup. He said no, thank you. We ate in silence. I tried small talk about bills, about Liam's school project, about the weather. He responded politely, as if I were a distant acquaintance. Then his phone buzzed. Another calendar reminder, downtown 10:30 a.m. He stood up, rinsed his plate, and said he had to run an errand. I asked where he was going. He said, "You'll find out soon enough." I said, "Don't be cryptic." He said, "You prefer public." That line made my throat close up. He left, and I just sat there staring at the empty chair across the table. The syrup bottle tipped slightly, dripping onto the placemat. I didn't clean it up. Jenna came over that afternoon. She said she'd seen more comments about the video, some of them nasty. I told her people were jealous, that they twisted everything to make me look cruel. She said I should post something new, maybe a picture of us smiling to drown out the negativity. I said maybe later. I asked her if she thought Evan was planning something. She shrugged and said, "He's too calm. Men like that don't explode, they plot." I laughed nervously, but it stayed with me long after she left. That night, I saw him sitting outside on the porch, laptop balanced on his knees. The glow from the screen lit his face pale blue. I asked if he was working again. He said, "Organizing." I said, "You've been organizing for days." He said, "There's a lot to sort." His voice didn't sound tired, just resolved. I asked, "Are you leaving me?" He looked up and said, "Not yet." Then he closed the laptop. I didn't know what to do with that answer. Not yet. It wasn't hope, it was warning. I told myself he was bluffing, trying to guilt me into apologizing. So I did what I always do when cornered. I made myself the hero in my own head. I opened my phone, read old messages from Theo, convinced myself I could still control how the story looked. Before bed, I went into the study again. The drawers were locked, but one folder sat on the desk, labeled neatly, "Household." It looked harmless. I opened it just enough to see spreadsheets, lists of assets, bills, and a single photo of us clipped to the corner. The photo was from last year, a beach trip. I looked happy, leaning into him, eyes squinting against the sun. He'd written something small in pencil on the back. Once. I put it back carefully and closed the folder. My hands were shaking. When I turned around, he was standing in the doorway. He didn't ask what I was doing. He just looked at me for a moment, then said, "You never realized how loud laughter sounds when it's about someone else." Then he turned and went upstairs, leaving me in the quiet room, the faint smell of toner still hanging in the air. I sat down at his desk, staring at the locked drawers, at the smooth perfection of his order. For the first time, the silence didn't feel like control. It felt like countdown. The following week blurred together. I went through the motions, work, errands, social posts, all mechanical, all hollow. Evan stayed distant but civil. We existed like two tenants sharing air, not vows. I'd begun to think the tension would simply stretch until it snapped quietly. Then Jenna invited me to a rooftop mixer her firm was hosting. She said I needed a break, a reminder that life wasn't just silence and spreadsheets. I agreed. Maybe a night around laughter would remind me who I used to be. Theo was there. I hadn't known until I walked in and saw him at the bar, that easy grin already waiting for me. He called me trouble when I arrived and ordered drinks before I could say no. I told myself it was harmless. I needed the distraction. The city lights shimmered around us like false stars, and music pulsed through the crowd. People were taking pictures, recording snippets of conversation, faces glowing in phone flashes. Jenna leaned in and whispered that I should loosen up, that I looked too stiff. So I laughed louder, gestured bigger, performed. Theo joked that my husband must be scared of all this energy. I rolled my eyes and said something about how Evan was allergic to fun. People nearby laughed. The words came easily, the laughter came faster. It felt good for about 5 seconds. Then I caught someone's phone camera lifting, pointed toward me. Theo raised his glass and said, "To free spirits who don't apologize for being alive." I clinked mine against his. We were standing close enough that his arm brushed mine. I didn't move. Someone shouted that we made a great duo. It was meant as a compliment, but it sounded like a dare. I heard myself say, "Don't tempt me." The small circle around us erupted in laughter. In the corner of my eye, I saw Jenna hesitate, her smile faltering for a second. She murmured, "Careful, girl. People film everything these days." I shrugged, pretending not to care, though my pulse stuttered. An hour later, I checked my phone. 2 missed calls from Evan. I ignored them. When the party started winding down, Theo offered to walk me to my car. On the way, he said quietly, "You don't deserve a man who treats you like a mistake to be managed." I said he didn't understand, that Evan wasn't cruel, just too calm. Theo laughed. Calm is a form of control, Mara. I didn't respond. By the time I got home, it was past midnight. The house lights were still on. Evan sat in the living room, laptop closed, a cup of tea beside him. He looked up when I entered, but didn't speak. I said I'd been out with friends. He said, "I know, Jenna posted a photo." I said that wasn't a crime. He nodded. "Neither is documentation." His tone was so measured that my stomach turned. The next morning, I woke to sunlight and an odd stillness. On the kitchen counter, beside his keys, was a folded newspaper, open to a blurry screenshot of last night's rooftop event. Me laughing with Theo, my hand on his arm. The headline wasn't scandalous, just local gossip fluff about corporate celebrations. But the image was enough. I felt my face heat up. When he came downstairs, I said it wasn't what it looked like. He said, "It never is." I told him he had no right to spy on me. He said, "You've been broadcasting for months. I just started paying attention." I wanted to hit something. Instead, I grabbed my phone and scrolled through the photos Jenna had posted. I wasn't tagged, but I was visible in the background, laughing too hard, leaning too close. The comments were full of strangers saying I looked free. That word used to make me proud. Now it just felt like an accusation. Later that afternoon, Ruth called. She didn't ask how I was. She said she'd seen the photos, that the family chat was concerned. I told her to stay out of our marriage. She said, "Your marriage stopped being private the moment you turned it into a performance." I hung up. When Liam came home from school, he went straight upstairs. He didn't even ask for his usual snack. I followed him to his room and asked what was wrong. He said he'd heard a classmate's mum talking about mommy being on the internet again. I told him adults gossip and that it didn't mean anything. He didn't answer. He just picked up his toy car and started rolling it back and forth, eyes fixed on the floor. That night, I found Evan on the porch again, staring out into the street. I asked if we were really doing this, living like polite ghosts until one of us broke. He said, "No one's breaking. We're just separating reality from noise." I said, "You sound like a lawyer." He said, "I've been listening to them lately." My throat went dry. I said, "You're bluffing." He said, "You think calm means bluffing." He stood then, stretched, and said he had early meetings the next few days. As he walked past me, I asked if he even loved me anymore. He paused at the doorway and said, "Love's supposed to protect, not humiliate." Then he went inside. When I checked his laptop later, it was locked with a new password. I sat there in the dim light, scrolling through my own social media instead. Every photo of me laughing now looked like evidence. Every caption sounded defensive. I deleted half of them, but the damage felt permanent. I poured myself a glass of wine and called Jenna. She picked up on the third ring, her voice low. "He's going to do something, isn't he?" she said. I asked what she meant. She said she'd seen a new tab open on his work computer earlier in the week, storage options, and notary near me. My chest went cold. I said she must have misread. She said she hoped so. When I hung up, I stared at the reflection of myself in the window. Messy hair, puffy eyes, a woman who looked more tired than guilty, but maybe both. Upstairs, I heard Evan moving around, drawers sliding, papers rustling. The sound wasn't frantic, it was rhythmic, practiced. I wanted to go up and demand he stop hiding behind that calm, but my legs wouldn't move. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table until the clock hit midnight, listening to the faint sounds of him packing something unseen. I told myself tomorrow I'd apologize properly, tell him I was ready to fix things. But underneath that thought, buried like a splinter, was another one I couldn't shake. What if he'd already fixed everything in his own way? I woke before dawn to the soft scrape of drawers. Evan was in the hallway, carrying a small box to the guest room. I didn't move, didn't speak. He looked so calm it almost scared me more than anger would have. When he saw I was awake, he said, "Go back to sleep." His voice wasn't cold, just final, like the matter was already settled. I stayed still until he closed the door behind him. By breakfast, he'd vanished again, his coffee mug washed, the scent of his aftershave fading from the air. On the table sat a neat pile of folded laundry, my things, not his. It wasn't a fight anymore, it was a process. I tried to distract myself by scrolling through my phone. Another post from the rooftop mixer had surfaced. Someone had zoomed in on me laughing beside Theo. The comments were merciless this time. Words like disrespectful and humiliation filled the thread. I deleted my account before I could stop myself. I spent the rest of the morning pacing. I told myself I would apologize properly this time. Not a half-hearted one, but a real, careful apology. Maybe he'd see that I meant it. Around noon, he came home. I started talking before he'd even put his keys down. I said I was sorry, that everything had gone too far, that people were twisting the story. He said, "People only twist things when there's rope." I told him he sounded rehearsed. He said, "That's what happens when you think before speaking." I followed him to the kitchen, trying to keep him in the conversation. I said, "You don't get to turn this around on me. You've been shutting me out." He said, "That's not shutting out, that's stepping back." I said, "It feels the same." He looked at me for a moment and said, "That's the difference. You feel, I measure." He rinsed his hands, dried them with precision, and went back upstairs. I stood there shaking. I called Jenna, told her he was acting robotic. She said maybe he was preparing to leave. I said he wouldn't. He wasn't that kind of man. She didn't sound convinced. She said, "Then why does it sound like he's already gone?" Later that afternoon, I went into the guest room. The box he'd carried earlier was on the desk. Inside were envelopes, utility bills, mortgage documents, old photos, all sorted by date. At the bottom was a small notebook. I flipped it open. Each page had a line or two written neatly. April, mocked again at dinner. May, public silence strategy begins. June, family witness reactions logged. It wasn't anger. It was record-keeping. I slammed the notebook shut and shoved it back into the box. When he came home that evening, I confronted him. I held up the notebook and asked if he was planning to write a memoir about our marriage. He said, "It's not a memoir, it's proof." My voice cracked when I asked, "Proof of what?" He said, "Patterns." I laughed, though it came out brittle. "You sound insane," I said. He didn't even blink. He just said, "Insane people don't back up their files." That line made my skin crawl. I asked what he meant. He said, "Nothing. Just that everything's safe now." I said, "Safe where?" He didn't answer. Instead, he looked at me for a long moment and said, "You should start thinking about what you want to keep." I tried to sound defiant. "What's that supposed to mean?" He said, "Exactly what it sounds like." Dinner was unbearable. Liam sat between us, quiet, eating without looking up. He asked if we were fighting again. I said no, just tired. Evan didn't correct me. When Liam went upstairs, I whispered, "You're scaring him." He said, "He deserves truth, not a performance." I said, "You think this makes you righteous?" He said, "No, just prepared." Then he stood and started gathering his plate. The sound of water running in the sink felt like static in my head. I said, "You can't just decide to quit being a husband." He said, "I already quit being your audience." I wanted to throw the glass in my hand but stopped myself. I just said, "You're not winning anything by doing this." He turned, drying his hands, and said, "Winning isn't the goal. Accuracy is." When he left the room, I felt something give way inside me. The silence wasn't just distance now, it was warning. I poured myself wine, 2 glasses in quick succession, until the edges of everything blurred. My phone buzzed. Theo again. "Heard things are messy. You okay?" I wrote back, trying to be. He sent another message. "Come out tonight, clear your head." I typed and erased a reply 3 times before locking the screen. I must have dozed off on the couch. When I woke, the house was dark except for the thin strip of light under the guest room door. I stood outside it, listening. Papers shuffled, the faint click of a pen cap, the soft hum of the computer fan. I knocked once. No answer. I pushed the door open. He was sitting there, calm as ever, a single lamp lighting his workspace. He didn't look up when I entered. I said, "Are you even going to tell me what you're doing?" He said, "Sorting what's mine." I laughed quietly, a sound more like disbelief than humor. "You make it sound like an inventory sale," I said. He said, "It's just preparation." I walked closer, looked at the screen. Rows of numbers, columns labeled with dates and notes. "You're seriously tracking our life like it's data," I said. He finally looked at me, eyes steady. "Data doesn't lie. People do." I told him I couldn't live like this, under quiet surveillance. He said, "You lived fine when the attention was on me." I said, "You're twisting everything." He said, "No, I'm clarifying it." Then he added, "Don't worry, I won't raise my voice. I'll handle it properly." The word properly hung in the air like a verdict. I tried to sound defiant. "You think your calm makes you better than me?" He said, "No, it just makes me clear." I said, "You're bluffing. You won't do anything drastic." He closed the laptop, stood, and said quietly, "Drastic is loud. I don't need loud." Then he walked past me, leaving me in the light of his desk lamp. I sat down in his chair after he left, staring at the neat order of his world, the folders, the notebooks, the USB drives labeled by date. It was terrifying in its calmness. Everything I'd laughed off before now felt like scaffolding around something real. Upstairs, I heard him stop by Liam's room, his voice soft, reassuring. I couldn't hear what he said, only the rhythm of his tone. Then a door closed gently. I realized it wasn't just preparation anymore. It was conclusion. I stayed awake until dawn again, waiting for some sign of confrontation, some explosion that would mean there was still chaos left to fix. But there was only quiet. His kind of quiet. The kind that sounded like decision. It happened on a Tuesday morning in the courthouse lobby. I'd gone there thinking we'd finally talk, but instead, a clerk stepped forward and handed me an envelope with my name in his handwriting. Inside were the legal papers, formal separation, custody terms, financial boundaries. Evan stood a few feet away, calm, watching. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to.